Section 9 of The Outermost House, A Year of Life on the Great Beach of Cape Cod by Henry Beston. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. The Outermost House by Henry Beston, Chapter 9, The Year at High Tide. Part 1. Had I room in this book, I should like to write a whole chapter on the sense of smell. For all my life long, I've had of that sense an individual enjoyment. To my mind, we live too completely by the eye. I like a good smell, the smell of a freshly plowed field on a warm morning after a night of April rain, the clove-like aroma of our wild Cape Cod pinks, the morning perfume of lilacs showery with dew, the good reek of hot saltgrass and low tide blowing from these meadows, late on summer afternoons. What a stench modern civilization breathes, and how have we ever learned to endure that foul blue air? In the 17th century, the air about a city must have been much the same air as overhung a large village. Today, the town atmosphere is to be endured only by the new synthetic man. Our whole English tradition neglects smell. In English, the nose is still something of an indelicate organ, and I'm not so sure that its use is not regarded as somewhat sensual. Our literary pictures of poetic landscapes are things to hang on the mind's wall, things for the eye. French letters are more indulgent to the nose. One can scarcely read 10 lines of any French verse without encountering the omnipresent, the inevitable parfum. And here the French are right, for though the eye is the human master sense and chief aesthetic gate, the creation of a mood or of a moment of earth poetry is a right for which other senses may be properly invoked. Of all such appeals to sensory recollection, none are more powerful, none open to a wider door in the brain than appeal to the nose. It is a sense that every lover of the elemental world ought to use, and using, enjoy. We ought to keep all senses vibrant and alive. Had we done so, we should never have built a civilization which outrages them, which so outrages them, indeed, that a vicious circle has been established and the dull sense grown duller. One reason for my love of this great beach is that, living here, I dwell in a world that has a good natural smell, that is full of keen, vivid, and interesting savors and fragrances. I have them at their best, perhaps when hot days are dulled with a warm rain. So well do I know them, indeed, that were I blindfolded and led about the summer beach, I think I could tell on what part of it I was at any moment standing. At the ocean's very edge the air is almost always cool, cold even, and delicately moist with surf spray and the endless dissolution of the innumerable bubbles of the foam slides. The wet sand slope beneath exhales a cool savor of mingling beach and sea, and the innermost breakers push ahead of them puffs of this fragrant air. It is a singular experience to walk this brim of ocean when the wind is blowing almost directly down the beach, but now veering a point toward the dunes, now a point toward the sea. For 20 feet a humid and tropical exhalation of hot, wet sand encircles one, and from this one steps as through a door into as many yards of mid-September. In a point of time one goes from Central America to Maine. Atop the broad 8-foot back of the summer bar, inland 40 feet or so from the edge of low tide, other odors wait. Here have the tides strewn a moist tableland with lumpy tangles, wisps and matted festoons of ocean vegetation, with common seagrass, with rockweed olive green and rockweed olive brown, with the crushed and wrinkled green leaves of sea lettuce, with edible purple-red dulce and bleached sea moss. with slimy and gelatinous cords 7 and 8 feet long. In the hot noontide they lie slowly withering, for their very substance is water, and sending an odor of ocean and vegetation into the burning air. I like this good natural savor. Sometimes a dead surf-trapped fish, perhaps a dead skate curling up in the heat, adds to this odor of vegetation a faint fishy rankness. But the smell is not earth corruption, and the scavengers of the beach soon enough remove the cause. Beyond the bar and the tidal runnel farther in, the flat region I call the upper beach runs back to the shadeless bastion of the dunes. In summer this beach is rarely covered by the tides. Here lies a hot and pleasant odor of sand. I find myself an angle of shade slanting off from a mass of wreckage still embedded in a dune. Take up a handful of the dry, bright sand, sift it slowly through my fingers, and note how the heat brings out the fine, sharp, stony smell of it. There is weed here, too, well buried in the dry sand, flotsam of last month's high full moon tides. In the shadowless glare, the topmost fronds and heart-shaped air sacs have ripened into an odd iodine orange and a blackish iodine brown. Overwhelmed thus by sand and heat, the aroma of this foliage has dissolved. Only a shower will summon it again from these crisping, strangely colored leaves. Cool breath of eastern ocean, the aroma of beach vegetation in the sun, the hot, pungent exhalation of fine sand. These mingled are the midsummer savor of the beach. Part 2. In my open, treeless world the year is at flood tide. All day long and all night long, for 4 days and 5 days, the southwest wind blows across the cape with the tireless constancy of a planetary river. The sun, descending the altar of the year, passes ritually on the steps of the summer months, the disk of flame overflowing. On hot days the beach is tremulous with rising visible heat bent seaward by the wind. A blue haze hangs inland over the moors and the great marsh, blotting out pictorial individualities and reducing the landscape to a mass. Dune days are sometimes hotter than village days, for the naked glare of sand reflects the heat. Dune nights are always cooler. On its sun-trodden sand, between the marsh wind and the coolness of ocean, the forecastle has been as comfortable as a ship at sea. The duneland air burns with the smell of sand, ocean, and sun. On the tops of the hills the grass stands at its tallest and greenest, its new straw-green seed plumes rising through a dead crop of last year's withered spears. On some leaves there is already a tiny spot of orange wither at the very tip, and thin lines of wither descending on either edge. Grasses in the salt meadows are fruiting. There are brownish and greenish-yellow patches on the levels of summer green. On the dunes the sand lies quiescent in a tangle of grass. In naked places it lies as if it were held down by the sun. When there has been no rain for a week or more, and the slanting flame has been heavy on the beach, the sand in my path down Forecastle Dune becomes so dry, so loose and deep that I trudge through it as through snow. The winter sea was a mirror in a cold, half-lighted room. The summer sea is a mirror in a room burning with light. So abundant is the light and so huge the mirror that the whole of a summer day floats reflected on the glass. Colors gather there, sunrise and twilight, cloud shadows and cloud reflections, the pewter dullness of gathering rain, the blue, burning splendor of space swept free of every cloud. Light transfixes ocean, and some warmth steals in with the light, but the waves that glint in the sun are still a tingling cold. Now do insects inherit the warm earth. When a sluggish wind blows from the marsh on a hot day, the dunes can be tropical. The sand quivers with insect lives. On such days greenheads, Tabanus costalis, stab and buzz. Sand gnats, or no-see-ums, gather in myriads on the sun-drenched south wall of the house. Flatiron flies and minor unknowns swarm to the attack. One must remain indoors or take a precautious refuge at the ocean's very edge. Thanks to the wind, the coolness, and the spray, the lower beach is usually free of insect bloodletters, though the bullying poisonous tabanid in the mid-August height of his season can be a hateful nuisance. So far, however, I have had but 2 of these tropical visitations. Barring an extra allowance of greenheads, the dunes are probably quite as habitable as any stretch of outermost beach. The wind, moreover, saves me from mosquitoes. Ants have appeared, and the upper beach is pitted with their hills. I watch the tiny red-brown creatures running in and out of buried weed. Just outside each hole the fine sand is all delicately ascrawl with the small, endless comings and goings. The whole upper beach, indeed, has become a plain of intense and minute life. There are tunnels and doors and pitways everywhere. The dune locusts that were so small in June have grown large and learned to make a sound. All up and down the dunes, sometimes swept seaward out of their course by the west wind, go various butterflies. When I turn up driftwood in the dunes or walk the wheel ruts in the meadows, crickets race off into the grass. On the dunes in open places near thin grass, I find the deep finger-round mine shafts of the dune spider. A foot below, in the cooler sand, lives the black female. Dig her up, and you will find a hairy, spidery ball. During the summer months the lady does not leave her cave, but in early autumn she revisits the world and scuttles through the dune grass, black, fast, and formidable. The smaller sand-colored male runs about everywhere. I saw one on the beach the other night, running along in cloudy moonlight, and mistook him at first for a small crab. Later, the same night, I found a tiny sand-colored dune toad at the very brim of the surf, and wondered if an appetite for beach fleas had led him there. June bugs, Lacnosterna arcuta, strike my screen with a formidable boom and linger there formidably buzzing. Let me but open the door, and half a dozen are tilting at my table lamp and falling stunned upon the cloth. On mounded slopes of sand, solitary black wasps scratch themselves out a cave. Across my paths move the shadows of giant dragonflies. The straggling beach peas of the region are in bloom. The west wind blows the grass and rushes out to the rippled levels of a level sea. Heat clouds hang motionless on the land horizon, their lower rims lost in the general haze. The great sun overflows. The year burns on. Part 3. I have spoken in another chapter of the melting away of bird life from this region during April and May. There was a time when the all-the-year-round herring gulls seemed the only birds left to me, and many of these were immature birds or birds whose plumage was then changing from immature brown to adult white and gray. One cold, foggy morning, late in May, I woke to find the beach in front of the forecastle crowded with these gulls, for a number of hake had stranded during the night, and the birds had discovered them and come to feed. Some fed on the fresh fish, findings being keepings. I saw various birds defend their individual repasts from late arrivals and would-be sharers with a show of wings and a hostile cry. Others stood on the top of the beach in a long senatorial row facing the sea. The maturing birds were of all tones of white and brown. Some were chalky and brown, some were speckled like hens. Others were a curious brown-mottled chalky gray. The molts of herring gulls are complicated affairs. There are spring molts and autumn molts, partial molts and second nuptial plumages. Not until the third year or later does the bird seem to assume its full nuptial and adult coloration. When I first open my eyes on a bright midsummer morning, the first sound that becomes part of my waking consciousness is the recurrent rush and spill of the summer sea. Then do I hear a patter of tiny feet on the roof over my head and the cheerful notes of a song sparrow's homespun tune. These sparrows are the songbirds of the dunes. I hear them all day long, for I have a pair nesting on the seaward slope of this dune in a clump of dusty miller. My building of the forecastle has given them something to sit on, something they can see the world from, and on its ridgepole they perch, singing at life in general with a praiseworthy persistence. The bird really has two songs, one the nuptial aria, the other the domestic tune. It sings the first in the nest-building, egg-laying season, and the second from the close of the honeymoon to the silence in the fall. I was amazed this year at the suddenness of the change. On the afternoon of July 1st, I heard the birds on my roof singing aria number 1. In the morning of July 2nd, they had turned the page to aria number 2. The songs are alike. They resemble each other in musical shape, but the first is much more of a warble than the second. On throwing open my door on the dunes, the morning sea, and the vast empty beach with its coastguard paths, I find the house being stormed by swallows. They are picking up the half-torpid flies that have spent the night on the shingles and just buzzed off. And on looking north and south along the dunes, I see swallows everywhere. The grass glistens in the early morning light. The slant of the sun picks out the ripening spears. The graceful birds swim close above the green. Most of these birds are bank swallows, riparia, but I often see barn swallows, Hirundo erythrogastra, and tree swallows, Iridoprocne bicolor, scattered in among them. A little after 7 o'clock they melt away. Through the day stray birds come foraging, but the swarm is a morning affair. The bank swallows, the bird with the whitish underparts and a dark band across the breast, have nests north of Nauset Station in a clay stratum of the Great Bank. The tree swallows and the barn swallows live farther inland, near the farms. Some say that the bank swallows nest in these dunes. I have never found their nests in this living sand, but the swallows may manage it after all. Time and again have I been astounded at the manner in which animals use this sand as if it were ordinary earth. Not long ago, on the top of Big Dune, I found that moles had tunneled a surface of live sand for 6 or 7 feet. The common tern, Sterna hirundo, here called the mackerel gull, dominates both the beach and the summer day. 3,000 or 4,000 of these birds are nesting in the region. There are nests on the dunes and whole colonies on certain gravelly areas in the marsh islands near Orleans. All day long I watch them flying to and fro past my windows, now sailing with the favoring wind, now battling into an opposing breeze. I see them going along the breakers long before sunrise. White birds flying past a rosiness of eastern sky and an ocean still blue and dark with night. I see them pass like spiritual creatures in the dusk. There are crowded days when I live in a cloud of their wings and the clamor of their cries. Sterna hirundo, the common tern, Wilson's tern some call it, is indeed a lovely bird. His dominant colors are pearl gray and white. His wings are bent. He is from 13 to 16 inches long, and he is marked by a black hood, an orange coral bill tipped with black, and bright vermilion orange legs and feet. To my ear the bird's call has a cawing quality. It is indeed a cawing screech with an E sound and a high pitch. Harsh though it is not disagreeable. Moreover, it is capable of wide emotional variations. Going south on a recent day along the dunes, I arrived at the place where the parent terns, homing from the sea, were crossing the sandbar on their way to their nests, and as the birds came in sight of their mates and their fledglings, their cry changed its quality and took on a kind of wild, harsh tenderness that was touching to hear. On Monday morning last, as I sat writing at my west window, I heard a tern give a strange cry, and on looking out and up I saw a bird harrying the female marsh hawk, of whose visits to the dunes I have already told. The seabird's battle cry was entirely new to my ear. "Ki-ki-ki-ki-yow," he cried. There was a warning in the harsh, horny cry, danger and anger. The greater bird flapping her wings as if they were spreads of paper. The winging of this hawk, near the earth, is sometimes curiously like the winging of a butterfly, made no answer, but sank to earth slowly, wings outspread, and rested for a long half-minute on the shell-strewn floor of the sand-pit 40 feet back from my house. Thus perched, motionless, she might have been a willing mark. Scolding without pause, the tern who had followed the enemy down into the pit then rose and dived on her, as he might have dived on a fish. The hawk continued to sit motionless. It was an extraordinary scene. Regaining level wing just above the hawk's head, the tern instantly climbed and dived again. At his third dive, the hawk took off, flying ahead and low across the sand-pit. The battle then moved into the dunes, and the last I saw of the affair was the hawk abandoning the hills and flying southward unpursued, far out over the marsh. Watching the hawk thus asquat on the sand in a summer intensity of light, with the gray seabird angrily assailing her, there came into my mind a thought of the ancient Egyptian representations of animals and birds. For this hawk in the pit was the Horus hawk of the Egyptians. The same poise, the same dark blood fierceness, the same authority. The longer I live here and the more I see of birds and animals, the greater my admiration becomes for those artists who worked in Egypt so many long 1,000 years ago, drawing, painting, carving in the stifling quiet of the royal tombs, putting here ducks frightened out of the Nile marshes, here cattle being herded down a village street, here the great sun vulture, the jackal, and the snake. To my mind, no representations of animals equal these Egyptian renderings. I do not write in praise of faithful delineation or pictorial usage, though the Egyptian drew from his model with care, but of the unique power to reach, understand, and portray the very psyche of animals. The power is particularly notable in Egyptian representations of birds. A hawk of stone carved in hardest granite on a temple wall will have the soul of all hawks in his eyes. Moreover, there is nothing human about these Egyptian creatures. They are self-contained and aloof as becomes folk of the first and intenser world. So completely do the thronging terns dominate the beach that they will often gather to chivvy off a human intruder. I'm often chased all the way to Nauset. 3 made for me yesterday afternoon as I was going north at 2 o'clock, trudging the hot and heavy sand. It is an odd, a rather amusing experience to be thus barked at and chivvied along by birds. Down the beach they followed me, keeping pace with me and stopping when I stopped. their swallow-like tail feathers fishtailing out as they maneuvered close above my head. About once every half-minute, one of the three would climb 20 or 30 feet above me and behind, tread air for a second or two, and then swoop directly down at me with a scolding cry, the rush ending in an upplane scarce a foot above my head. So soundly was I scolded, and so constant was the sharp clamor, that one might have thought that the birds had found me pirating eggs and nestlings. As a matter of fact, I was miles away from any nest or nesting place. Those who disturb terns actually on their nests are chivied by dozens in just such a manner, and are even struck vigorously by the birds. I suspect the marsh hawk of being on her way to raid these nests. Madam Hawk has probably been sitting on eggs of her own, for I have seen little of her since she gave up her daily forays sometime in the spring. From mid-June to mid-July the terns are at their best. Their eggs are hatching, the fish are running, and all day long the parent birds are going back and forth between their nests and the sea. When I open my door at sunrise, the terns are already passing by my house, flying 20 or 30 feet above the curling incoming seas. Hour by hour they pass in two endless streams, one going fishing, the other bringing home the catch. Hour after hour they pass, thousands of birds an hour, when the fishing is good and near at hand. Returning birds, almost without exception, hold silvery fish crosswise in their bills, and unlike the crow in the fable, a tern can cry out without dropping its prize. The great majority of these birds are males bringing food to their mates and the newborn young. The catch usually consists of 3 and 4 inch sand eels, but I occasionally see birds flying bow down with tinker mackerel. Sometimes a bird passes carrying 2 eels, holding the pair as best he can. A week ago, just after 2 o'clock on a bright afternoon, the birds suddenly came streaming from everywhere to the surf along the dunes. Skates had again driven in a people of eels. It was high tide. The seas gathered and broke, the heaviest shaking the beach, into the curling baroque crests of the waves, into the advancing slopes of the gathering green swells, into the race and flow of white seas and yellow sand. The bright air rained down birds on the now doubly imperiled and darting prey. The air was cut with wings and pierced with eager, hungry, and continuous cries. The birds make plummet dives and strike up jets of water from the surf. The harassed fish, moving south, the terns followed after them. An hour later, through field glasses, I could see the thing still going on just north and seaward of the shoals. Piratic jaegers, Stercorarius homarinus, Stercorius parasiticus, apparently never trouble these Eastham birds. I have seen but one jaeger on this beach, and that a solitary bird who chanced to pass the house one morning last September. Cape Cod neighbors, however, tell me that jaegers are numerous in the bay, and that they harry the terns who fish the shoals off Billingsgate. Almost every day in the full heat of noontide I go down to the lower beach and lie down for a while on the hot sand, an arm over my eyes. The other day, in a spirit of fun, I raised my arm toward a passing tern. The returning birds fly scarce 30 feet above the beach, and to my amusement the creature paused, sank, and hovered above me for a few seconds, scarce 10 feet from my hand. I saw then that its underplumage, instead of being white, was a lovely faint rose. I had halted a roseate tern, Sterna dugali. I wriggled my fingers. The bird responded with a cry in which I read bewildered indignation. Then on it flew, and the incident ended. This year a number of laughing gulls, Larus atricilla, accompany the terns fishing. the dozen or so gulls keeping to themselves while flying with their neighbors. The most interesting adventure with birds I have had this summer I had with a flock of least terns, Sterna antillarum. It came to pass that early one morning in June, as I happened to be passing Big Dune, a covey of small terns unexpectedly sailed out at me and hovered about me, scolding and complaining. To my great delight, I saw that they were least terns, or tit gulls, rare creatures on our coast, and perhaps the prettiest and most graceful of summer's ocean birds. A miniature tern, the leastie, scarce larger than a swallow, and you may know him by the lighter gray of his plumage, his bright lemon-yellow bill, and his delicate orange-yellow feet. The birds were nesting at the foot of Big Dune, and I had disturbed their peace. In the splendor of morning they hung above me, now uttering a single alarmed cheep, now a series of staccato cries. I walked over to the nests. The nest of such a beach bird is a singular affair. It is but a depression, and sometimes scarcely that, in the open, shelterless beach. Nest building on the open sand, says Mr. Forbush, is but the work of a moment. The bird alights, crouches slightly, and works its little feet so rapidly that the motion seems a mere blur, while the sand flies out in every direction as the creature pivots about. The tern then settles lower and smooths the cavity by turning and working and moving its body from side to side. I have mislaid the scrap of paper on which I jotted down the number of nests I found that morning, but I think I counted 20 to 25. There were eggs in every nest, in some 2, in others 3, in one case, and only one, 4. To describe the coloration of the shells is difficult, for there was a deal of variation, but perhaps I can give some idea of their appearance by saying that they were beach-colored with overtones of bluish-green, and speckled with browns and violet-browns and lavenders. What interested me most, however, was not the eggs, but the manner in which the birds had decorated their nests with pebbles and bits of shell. Here and there along the beach the leasties had picked up flat bits of seashell about the size of a fingernail, and with these bits they had lined the bowl of their nests, setting the flat pieces in flat like parts of a mosaic. For 2 weeks I watched these leasties and their nests, taking every precaution not to disturb or alarm the setting birds. Yet I had but to pass anywhere between them and the tide to put them up, and when I walked south with the coastguardsmen I heard single cries of alarm in the starry and enormous night. Toward the end of June a sudden northeaster came. It was a night storm. I built a little fire, wrote a letter or 2, and listened to the howling wind and the bursts of rain. All night long, and it was a wakeful, noisy night, I had the leasties on my mind. I felt them out there on the wild, shelterless beach with the black gale screaming over them and the rain pouring down. Opening my door, I looked for a moment into the drenching blackness and heard a great roaring of the sea. The tide and the gale had ebbed together when I rose at 5 the next morning, but there was still wind and a gray drizzle. At the foot of Big Dune I found desolation. The tide had swept the beach. Not a nest remained, or a sign of a nest, and the birds had gone. Later that day, just south of Big Dune, I saw bits of bluish-green eggshell in a lump of fresh weed. Where the birds went to, I never knew. Probably to a better place to try again. Bless me, I thought, returning. What of the song sparrows? Through the drenching grass, bare-legged, I hurried to the dusty miller bush. The sand had been moving during the night. It had crept along the dunes. It had rained down with the drops of rain, and the bush was now well embedded. Indeed, it was a bush no more, but a thicket of separate stalks growing out of a deep rain-soaked mound of sand. As I drew close to it, I saw through the rain the prudent eyes of Madame Sparrow aglint in the leaves. The sand had risen to within an inch of her nest. The leaves which concealed it were awry with wind and choked with sand, but there sat the little bird, resolved and dutiful. She raised her brood, how well she deserved to, and sometime in July the whole family moved out into the dunes. I must now add a paragraph from my autumnal notes and tell of my last sight of the great summer throng of terns. It was an unforgettable experience. During August the birds thinned out, and as the month drew to a close, whole days passed without a sight or sign of their presence. By September 1st I imagined that the most of them had gone. Then came the unexpected. On Saturday, September 3rd, friends came down the beach to see me, and at the close of their visit, as I opened the forecastle door, I found that the air above the dunes was snowy with young terns. The day had been mild, and the late afternoon light was mild and rosy golden. The sun was an hour from his setting, and high in space and golden light the myriads of birds drifted and whirled like leaves. North and south we saw them for miles along the dunes. For 20 minutes perhaps, or half an hour, the swarming filled my sky, and during all that time I did not hear a single bird utter a single sound. At the end of that period, withdrawing south and inland, the gathering melted away. It was really a very curious thing. Apparently some impulse from heaven had suddenly seized upon the birds, entered into their feathered breasts, and led them into the air above the dunes. Whence came that spirit? Whence its will, and how had it breathed its purpose into those 1,000 hearts? The whole performance reminded me very much of a swarming of bees. A migrational impulse, yes, and something more. The birds were flying high, higher than I had ever seen terns go, and as far as I could judge or guess, the great majority of the flyers were young birds of the year. It was a rapture, a glory of the young, and this was the last of the terns. Late August, and day by day, I see more shorebirds and see them oftener. All summer long there have been sandpipers and ringnecks on the beach, but earlier in the season the birds are elusive and may disappear for days. The first great flocks to return from the northern breeding grounds arrived here about the middle of July. I remember their coming. For 4 interminable days a strong and tireless southwest wind had billowed across the lagoon and off to a smoky sea. On the morning of the 5th day, just before sunrise, this wind had died, then had come the dullness and quiet, and between 9 and 10 o'clock a breath of easterly air. All that 5th afternoon the beach had been black with birds, most of them ringnecks or semi-palmated plovers. The long southwester had apparently dammed up a great migrational stream. These first flocks were vagrant mobs. Walking to Nauset between 2 and 3 o'clock, I must have put up between 2,000 and 3,000 birds. As I drew near, mob after mob after mob crowded the air and sought feeding grounds ahead. The smaller autumnal flocks had flown in psychic unity, rising and falling, wheeling and alighting together. These mobs scattered and dived into wandering companies. Late August, and my wild ducks, having raised their families, are returning by hundreds to the marsh. During May and June and early July, when I wandered about this region in the night, I heard no sound from the flats. Now, when I get out to signal to the first coastguardsman coming south at 9:30, I heard from the dark levels a sentinel quack, a call. The marsh fills with life again. The great sun goes south along green treetops and moorlands, fruiting and burned brown. The quality of life which in the ardor of spring was personal and sexual, becomes social in midsummer. Stirred by the vernal fire, a group psychically dissolves, for every creature in a flock is intent upon the use and the offering of his own awakened flesh. Even creatures who are of the flocking or herding habit emerge as individuals. With the rearing of the young and their integration into the re-established group, life becomes again a social rhythm. The body has been given and sacrificially broken, its own gods and all gods obeyed. Part 4. The other day I saw a young swimmer in the surf. He was, I judged, about 22 years old and a little less than 6 feet tall, splendidly built, and as he stripped I saw that he must have been swimming since the season began, for he was sunburned and brown. Standing naked on the steep beach, his feet in the climbing seas, he gathered himself for a swimmer's crouching spring, watched his opportunity, and suddenly leaped headfirst through a long arc of air into the wall of a towering and enormous wave. Again and again he repeated his jest, emerging each time beyond the breaker with a stare of salty eyes, a shake of the head, and a smile. It was all a beautiful thing to see, the surf thundering across the great natural world, the beautiful and compact body in its naked strength and symmetry, the astounding plunge across the air, arms extended ahead, legs and feet together, the emerging stroke of the flat hands, and the alternate rhythms of the sunburned and powerful shoulders. Watching this picture of a fine human being, free for the moment of everything save his own humanity, and framed in a scene of nature, I could not help musing on the mystery of the human body, and of how nothing can equal its rich and rhythmic beauty when it is beautiful, or approach its forlorn and pathetic ugliness when beauty has not been mingled in, or has withdrawn. Poor body, time and the long years were the first tailors to teach you the merciful use of clothes. Though some scold today because you are too much seen, to my mind you are not seen fully enough or often enough when you are beautiful. All my life it has given me pleasure to see beautiful human beings. To see beautiful young men and women gives one a kind of reverence for humanity. Alas, of how few experiences may this be said, and surely there are few moods of the spirit more worthy of our care than those in which we reverence, even for a moment, our tragic and bewildered kind. My swimmer having gone his way, out of a chance curiosity I picked the top of a dune goldenrod, and found at the very bottom of a cocoon of twisted leaves the embryo head of the late autumnal flower. End of Chapter 9. Read by Shelley Weingart, May 2024, Wareham, Massachusetts.